Good afternoon from London. This is Dermot Hudson, Chairman of the Juche Idea Study Group of England, Official Delegate of the Korean Friendship Association for the UK, and President of the Association for the Study of Song and Politics. I'm here today to do another of my short videos by popular demand. Just thought I would speak today on what Juche actually means, how we can apply it in practice, particularly in the conditions of Britain. Now, before I actually speak about the actual subject, just would point out that a few days ago, Associated Press published an article on what Juche means, which included material from an interview from myself. However, they only used a few lines of what I'd actually said. They actually sent me about, I think, 9 or 10 questions, of which I gave answers to, but they only used a little bit of it. And my friend, Professor Kim Chang-gwon of the Korean Association of Social Scientists is also quoted in the article. He was the person who actually supervised my doctorate of sociopolitics in the DPRK. And one of the things I would take issue with in the article is a real blatant slander on the DPRK, which says that it is dependent on foreign aid, and apparently massively so. Now, this is a load of old rubbish, a load of old tosh. It's simply not true. Everyone knows that the DPRK is, in fact, one of the most self-reliant and self-sufficient countries in the world. And, where's this foreign aid coming from? Because the DPRK is under massive sanctions by the UN. There's about numerous UN sanctions packages that were passed by the UN Security Council, including 3 sets of very severe sanctions that were passed by the UN Security Council 2 years ago in 2017, which are basically only a few steps short of a total blockade of the DPRK. And of course, the US has its own sanctions against the DPRK. The EU does, the UK does, Japan does, I think Australia and Canada do. So DPRK, in fact, faces massive sanctions. But, when a lot of people visit Pyongyang and look in the shops, they always say, sanctions? What sanctions? Because you will see well-stocked shops, and this is all due to self-reliance. And the article also referred briefly to the so-called famine in the DPRK in the 90s. Now, no one denies that was a very difficult period for the DPRK, an extremely difficult and heart-rending period in which you had several years of recurrent natural disasters, intensified blockade by the imperialists, and the loss of the world's socialist market. But the DPRK survived, and I was in the DPRK in 1996. Didn't see anyone begging, no one searching for food. I mean, I think the term famine is very a very inaccurate term, because you didn't see what was seen in some developing countries when they suffered from crop failures and so on. Of course, there were food shortages in the DPRK. That's not denied, and the DPRK government called the period the arduous march. But yeah, it's quite wrong to portray the DPRK as dependent. You know, some people used to say that the DPRK uh, was dependent on the USSR, for example. Well, this is rubbish because the USSR collapsed, ceased to exist uh, in December 1991. So, you know, after 28 years, why hasn't the DPRK collapsed if it was dependent on the Soviet Union? And it used to be very fashionable to portray the DPRK as, in some way, a dependency or a creation